Hello, everyone, and welcome to our seminar today, our webinar today on schools as living systems. We're looking at organizational capacity and different ways, different strategies that you can use to build your organizational capacity for technology planning. I am going to wait a little while, just a couple more minutes to see if we get some more participants, and then we'll get started. So thank you for your patience. It would be great to know who's here, your role in your school district, where you're located, or if you're from Bluum. I know some of our account executives are joining us this morning as well, or today, this afternoon, depending on your location in the country. Just put in there where you're from. That'd be great. Also, we have a guide for the webinar. So if you, Camille is going to put the link in the chat for everyone. So if you want to grab that, it should ask you if you can make a copy, and you can make a copy and have the guide for today's webinar as we go through it. Welcome, Brittany. Emily's here. Ashley, welcome. We had a lot of schools from Colorado sign up, so it was great to see that. There's Suzanne. Suzanne, I think you were on the call the last time as well. Am I right about that? I think I remember seeing your name. Jordan, welcome. Jordan, I think you might have been here too. Right. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I am going to be circling back to the first presentation because we are going to be talking about a model for change, and it builds on what you've done previously, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you missed something. Certainly you'll catch what we did on March 2nd, and we'll build on that today. So again, I want to welcome everybody for being here. Thank you. And we will get started. Quick introduction to me, same as the last time. I love drones. I love everything about educational technology. And I have had a fantastic career with public schools and private schools, where education technology has been a key part of my work. And I'm now working with Bluum as an education strategist, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. When we met on March 2nd, one of the things we talked about was a model for technology planning. And I shared this model, which is a pretty traditional model for technology planning, where you create a vision, you have an inventory of the resources that you already own. You have a curriculum where you're integrating that technology, or you're reviewing the way that you're integrating technology into your curriculum. You kind of figure out your infrastructure, and do you have enough to support what it is you hope to do and hope to support that vision, educating your school community, making a decision, planning your budget and your rotation cycle. And I shared that process the last time, and many of the people on the call agreed that that was more or less the process that they had used as they developed their technology planning historically. And it's a model that they've used now, and a lot of school districts do. And that's a really great process to have in place for continual review. But what I'm going to be sharing with you today is a little bit different. This is really about supporting that process with a model for change and really taking a systems approach to scaling pedagogical innovation. And on March 2nd, we spent a lot of time talking about invitation and discovery. And on the guide that we shared with you, you'll see that the first 3 questions are from invitation and discovery phase. And we'll be building on that, as I said earlier. But this is the model that we're going to be really focused on, and how we can use this to support and initiate change in our school districts. And I'll use the term schools, school districts sort of interchangeably throughout the presentation. So the series started, as I said, March 2nd, and we talked about initiating the technology planning process and really plotting a strategic journey and what that looks like. Today, we're going to build on that, and we're going to be looking at how we can balance advocacy and inquiry, and to our advantage to move our initiative forward. And there's the next step in the spiral model for change is collective maturation and sponsorship. And we'll get into what that means in just a minute. So these are some learning outcomes for the session. I hope that by the end of the session, you'll be able to identify different ways you can seed the ground to begin your work. You will learn about the roles and voices you need on your leadership team for advocacy and for inquiry. And you'll be able to support team members as they engage in unique inquiry projects. When we met, one of the other things that we talked about were the hurdles, accelerators, and tech enablers. And we shared some of the hurdles, accelerators, and tech enablers that we have in our own districts. What you see on the screen right now are those hurdles, accelerators, and tech enablers that were identified in the COSIN Innovation Survey that's done every year. These are the ones from 2022. We're just going to put the link in the chat so that you have access to that. It's very interesting to see sort of where we are today as schools are coming out of the pandemic and what hurdles we're facing. And one of the hurdles that we're seeing is scaling innovation and the inertia of education systems. Historically, our schools are not particularly agile institutions. And so scaling innovation can be a challenge because there is a lot of inertia within the education systems historically. So the model that we'll be talking about again today really helps us to scale innovation in a way that allows many different stakeholders to be involved and really takes into consideration their voices and the directions that they want to take the work in this innovative project and the initiatives. The other element of the COSIN Innovation Survey that we really take a look at is an accelerator, and it's building the human capacity of leaders. So we're really going to be talking about how do we cultivate teachers as leaders within our school district, and how do we support them to become leaders in the work that we're doing. I always like to start with a question that gets us thinking. And today, the opening question that I chose is on the first page in the guide that we shared earlier. And if you were to visit the shoreline after the tide comes in, you might notice how much higher the water level had become. But if you sat and watched, you watched as the tide came in, you would not necessarily see it rising. You would just notice the rhythm of the waves crashing on the shoreline. So when you are immersed in this work, when you are immersed in change on a continuous basis, it's often not noticeable. So the opening question today is, if you pause and observe, we will find instances of innovation that are sparking change. And I just want you to pause for a minute and jot down any ideas that you might have about where you've seen instances of change, or instances of people that have sort of sparked change. So they're the folks that are kind of the waves crashing on the shore as you roll out your initiative. Those are the ones that are bringing the tide in and leading that change. I have several examples that I'm going to be sharing for you in a little bit as we get deeper into the webinar. But if you have one instance where you've noticed change, just jot it down. All right. I just want to provide a little context for the work that we're going to be doing here and what we'll be talking about today. And as educators, again, we must prepare all students to live and work in a dynamic, technology-driven world. And I see educational technology as an indicator of innovation in our school systems. So it's a way that we can assess pedagogical innovation and plan changes around changes and progress along 3 dimensions: pedagogical, technological, and organizational dimensions. So again, this is the spiral model for change. We'll be referring to this throughout this webinar series. We focused on innovation and discovery on March 2nd, and today we're going to be looking at collective maturation and sponsorship. So invitation and discovery, I just want to circle back to what that looks like and some of the elements of invitation and discovery. So when you start to plot a strategic journey, you're really looking at how you're bringing together a core of committed individuals and how you can help them to define why you're seeking change, the potentials to which the system aspires, and how you can begin to move toward those potentials. And the first 2 steps are to really define how you can step into your role as a leader and also identify who you can invite to join you in that work. With collective maturation and creating sponsorship containers, you're building on what the work that you've already done. You've sort of laid the framework in that initial step, in that core group, and now you're going to start to seed the ground and really move the work forward so that you start to, you have that core group of people, but now you're going to start to make waves. So today we're going to look at these 3 steps as a part of collective maturation and sponsorship. What are you doing to seed the ground? How do you balance advocacy and inquiry? And what containers for inquiry do you create and/or support? So in the first stage of invitation and discovery, one of the things that we did was we defined how do you step into your role as a leader? And we had lots of different suggestions about how you can lead this work and step into that role and invite people to be a part of it. Some of the ideas that came out of that in terms of stepping into your role were to set up, gather information, do some research, identify who the most important stakeholder is in your organization that you need to report to on a regular basis about the progress of the work. Schedule meetings and interviews with key stakeholders like principals, union leaders, district leaders, your business official, your facilities director, whoever that is. Also, you can participate in superintendent's conference days, even take a next step and organize them. And you could also use social media to share some of the great things that you see happening out there that you've gathered from doing your research. Having a dedicated web page. The last thing I have on here is communicate, communicate, communicate. You want to make sure that you're sharing what you're doing and what you're finding out there that's really connected to your initiative. So after you've stepped into your role as a leader and you've sort of defined what that's going to look like, to continue the work, you need to seed the ground. And when you seed the ground, you're bringing together a core group of committed stakeholders, like we said before, but you're really starting to plant those seeds and bring people in that are going to move your initiative forward with that core group of people that are a part of your technology leadership team. So some of the things that you can do, you could bring in an expert keynote. I've always modeled the technologies that we're using. So if we're bringing in a new device, if we're bringing in VR goggles, if we're bringing in a new type of document camera, whatever it is, starting a new learning management system, model those technologies every chance you get. So if you're speaking at faculty meetings, if you're speaking to the Board of Education, if you're speaking with your administrative team, model all of the technologies that you have access to. It's really important also to use the vocabulary associated with the initiative or the change. That was one of the things that we identified on March 2nd, naming that vocabulary that's very important to the change you want to see. So what is it? And start to use it on a regular basis. You also want to make sure you're supporting your technology leadership team. One of the things that I did to seed the ground when I was an assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and technology was to make sure that the technology leadership team always had opportunities to be together, to share ideas, and to stay connected. We did that in a couple of different ways. Monthly meetings were super helpful in the beginning, where we could get together, share our thinking about lessons, about different units of study and the role that technology would play in that. But we also attended an annual educational technology conference that takes place in New York State every year through the New York Association for Computers and Technologies in Education. And so every year the entire group would come up and we would attend sessions that were a part of the conference. We would get together, share what we thought about those sessions, what we learned, how they were relevant for our teachers, for our students, how we might be able to use the different things that we learned. And also we talked about what we would have to do in order to bring those ideas back to our schools. So again, on the guide, there is a question under collective maturation and sponsorship container to what do you have to do to seed the ground and take local action? And this really builds on that initial step of stepping into your role as a leader. With invitation and discovery, we also spoke about who do I invite? And I asked you to share the characteristics of a teacher leader. So if you were thinking about teacher leaders that you wanted to invite to be a part of this, what characteristics would you look for? And you shared things like curiosity, growth mindset, innovation, dependability, collegiality, integrity, confidence. You wanted people that were reflective. And these were the characteristics of people that you would invite to be a part of your leadership team. We also talked about how you identify these individuals and how you could talk to your principals or your union leaders to identify people that would be valuable members of your technology leadership team, and how that group, that core group, needs to be representative of your organization as a whole. So you need to include a principal or an administrator. You need to include somebody that's from your technical staff. You need to include teachers based on the sort of configuration of your school district. So you need elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers. You really have to make sure that there's representation from all levels. So I asked you to jot down who you would invite to be a part of the technology leadership team. And I asked you to write down the names of 5 staff or faculty members that you would invite. Just take 10 seconds to revisit those names, or if you didn't have a chance to write them down, just jot some names down now. Because the next step that we're going to look at is balancing inquiry and advocacy. And we're going to look at the members of your team. So how do you balance advocacy and inquiry? And I like to use a model that David Kantor developed. It's the Kantor 4-player model. And he developed this as a part of his work on structural dynamics. It takes many different mindsets and behaviors to really make a team hum. And it's useful to hold up a mirror to the team and do some reflection on who's there and the role that they play in terms of the initiative that you're currently working on. So in Kantor's model, there are 4 sort of archetypes: movers, followers, opposers, and bystanders. And each role brings a specific action to the conversation. And understanding these and learning how to use them effectively is a tool in practice to move an initiative forward and develop a deeper understanding of the work that has been done to date and looking at the work that still needs to be done. By doing this, you can actually, it'll help you overcome patterns that lead to sort of a stuckness in communication, learning, and decision-making. So your movers help you think of ideas and keep the conversations moving along. Followers are good at adding to and developing ideas and supporting conversations and progress. Your opposers challenge the new ideas and encourage exploration and movement. Maybe not in the direction you initially planned, but they help you to make corrections to that direction if they're necessary. And bystanders, these are often observers, and they bring a quieter voice of support to the conversation, to the initiative, generally offering a variety of perspectives. So we're going to take a closer look at all 4 of these, starting with the mover. And without movers, there is no direction. We all love to have movers on our team, right? Those are probably most of the people on the list that you identified were either movers or followers. But movers initiate action and ideas. They set and propose a direction. They help you create that vision. And they really move the team along by taking action. These are the folks that have the ability to achieve results. They will push you for change. They'll help you accomplish your important priorities. And they are generous and giving with their time because they're passionate about the work that you're doing. So who are your followers? Without followers, nothing gets accomplished, right? You need your followers to really help you move the initiative forward. Your movers are those kind of sparks or waves that are happening. And then your followers are coming in and saying, yes, I believe in this work. I want to get involved. So they'll help by implementing what others are doing. They're good at adding to the ideas and taking what somebody has started and perhaps applying it in a slightly different way. They're good at supporting your conversations and your progress. They have the ability to sense really what's happening in your system, others' needs. They provide appreciation and they're generous, they're receiving that work generously. So opposers. These can be perceived as naysayers. Perhaps you may feel that these are folks that are always finding fault with the initiatives as they are being rolled out or as they're progressing. Sometimes they can even appear to be confrontational or resistant. But opposers play a very important role in any work that you do. They help us make corrections as an initiative is rolled out. By listening to their voices, you can change if something's not going right, or if they'll provide you with very honest feedback about what's happened, if it's worked, if it hasn't worked. And often they will provide you with the information that you need to make small adjustments so that the initiative can stay on track or even move in a slightly different direction so that you can surface differences or different ways of doing things. So they really provide that critical feedback by playing devil's advocate. The last sort of archetype in the model are bystanders. And bystanders, or they may be perceived as passive or detached from the initiative. They can often lend, though, a supportive voice. They offer different perspectives. They support different ideas. They are more analytical often, but without your bystanders, there is no perspective. You have your opposers, you have your movers and followers. Your bystanders kind of take a step back, they look at what's happening, and they can often see both sides. And they're really sort of your reflection or your mirror on the initiative as it's being rolled out. So no one role of Kantor's is better than another. In fact, you really need all four roles in order for a team to operate efficiently. And you'll see that often, and you may have experienced this yourself, where you may shift roles from moment to moment. So you may be a mover in one part of the initiative, but you may be a bystander in another part of an initiative or a conversation. So you don't necessarily have one role during a single interaction. So I just want you to take a minute, and those folks that you initially put on your list, consider the list of people that you chose to invite. Are there movers, followers, opposers, and bystanders on that list? Now that you've sort of looked at the list through this frame, are there others who you might choose to invite? Generally, people don't include opposers the first time they compose a list of who they want to invite to be a part of the work. But I encourage you to invite the opposers because they lend a very valuable voice to the work that you're doing and can help you at the end move the initiative forward. Even if it's not exactly what you envisioned from the beginning, they can help you make the necessary corrections so that it can become a part of what your learning system needs. So I have a quick poll here if you're up for it. When you first thought of the people that you would invite to join as a part of the new initiative, were primarily movers, followers, opposers, or bystanders? Now be honest. Results of the poll, and I can't participate. Just choose one of those four. All right. So they were movers. 4 people responded, movers. That's typically what I see. Sometimes I'll see followers, but yes, typically movers and followers. We don't invite bystanders because they're a little quieter, and we don't invite opposers because they can be perceived as being difficult. All right, thank you so much. So the next part of our model for change is sponsorship. What containers for inquiry do you need to create and or support? So this is sort of a strange question for people not familiar with the model. What do I mean by containers? So containers are spaces where people can experiment or explore what it is that you're doing as a part of the initiative, and they can develop their practice as a part of the work, right? So for instance, one of the containers that I created that I relied on as a part of my work was that NYSCATE annual conference for educational technology. And I relied on that because it gave the members of the technology leadership team the time to go hear what was happening in places in other school districts around the state and really learn from how they were experimenting from their inquiry. And then they could bring that back to our schools and our classrooms in a way that might be slightly different, but they could try it. So that was my container. I got a lot of feedback from the team that it was super valuable. So we've done it every year. And we were able to see what was happening elsewhere and then bring it back and experiment and explore with it in our schools. So a couple of different containers that I needed to support though. I created those containers, the NYSCATE annual conference and the monthly meetings, but each team member, and initially there were 10 team members. The second and third year I had more, and ultimately the membership of the technology leadership team changed, but I continued to support everybody that was on it that wanted to try new things. So what are some examples? I had a science teacher and a technology coach who were very interested in following the spiders in space. And I think this was maybe 2012 or so. And they wanted to create a wiki, and they wanted to invite schools from around the world to participate in this wiki and share the questions they had about the spiders in space. And so they had taken the spiders up to space to see if they would build their webs, or what it would look like if the spiders tried to build webs in space. And so they created the wiki. They sent out an invitation for schools around the world to join the wiki on a listserv. And we ended up with 36 different schools, classrooms, sharing ideas and questions and posing hypotheses about what would happen with the spiders in space. And they would go and they would share their observations. They would share what they learned. And at the end, we had this complete wiki of schools and students sharing ideas about the spiders. At the end, too, our school ended up connecting with a school in Tasmania. And there's a big time difference there with a school in New York State. So our students actually came back to school at 8 o'clock at night. And we used traditional video conferencing equipment, a Polycom, to connect our students with the students in Tasmania to share the experience of working on the wiki, and then also to share different things that were happening in their schools. Another example that I have with creating a container, there was a library media specialist that wanted to build a course called Discoveries in Computing. And so she took some classes and she put together a curriculum. And one of the things that she wanted to do was develop a curriculum for the students to explore drones and to learn about drones. So we bought some drones, and the students went through an entire curriculum on learning how to operate the drones. We created obstacle courses where they could fly the drones through obstacle courses to learn how to really maneuver them. We also had an electronic music production class. So the students paired up with a student in the electronic music production class, and they programmed their drones using drone blocks to perform to the electronic music that they created. And then they also used Tinkercad to design a drone, and then they did a 3D printing of that drone, and then went out and tried to fly it. So we had parts and propellers and motors and everything that you could use. And then after the first attempt to fly it, they took notes, made their observations, made some changes to their design, and then printed it again and tried to fly it again. So she was very passionate about doing that work, and that was a container where she explored. This eventually moved from the team to other teachers asking for opportunities to do different things. And we always supported that because it meant that our initiative was kind of taking hold, and we were able to support even more teachers. One example that we had is we actually held a hackathon with our 6th grade students, and a hackathon in terms of problem solving. And we had the whole 6th grade team want the students to be involved with a hackathon for the local community, with solving the problem of how do we attract more visitors to the downtown area in the community. And the students actually had to go and interview people on the main street, gather information, and go through the whole design thinking process to come up with a solution that they then pitched to a panel of experts. And one idea was chosen, and the Chamber of Commerce actually moved forward and developed that idea. And they used a coding platform to code their idea and to do their presentations. So that's sort of an example of how we started with these individual containers, and then how it moved out to the rest of the teachers and classrooms. So this work is really grounded in this principle of creative tension, where the concept is talked about by Peter Senge in the 5th discipline, as well as Robert Fritz. He has some great stuff about creative tension in his book, The Path of Least Resistance. But creative tension is essentially a structure that helps to facilitate creativity and change, right? So you have your vision and your current reality, but how do you move from where you are to where you want to be? And the gap between your vision and your current reality is where all of this work is done. It's where you support those sponsorship containers. It's where you design your own containers. It's where you bring people in to talk about the work that they're doing and the results that they're seeing. It also helps you to stay open to different ways that you could close the gap between reality and your vision. So you always want to hold fast to your what, your vision that you want to create, but be very loose about that how you're creating it. And as the leader of these initiatives, that how, you really want to empower your teacher leaders to be the how. They will help you achieve that vision, not necessarily the way you would have done it in the classroom, but they'll have their own interpretation and be able to move that work forward by really taking it and running with it in different ways. And that's really what you want. You want them experimenting and exploring in different ways. So the spiral model for change, as I've said before, is a systems approach to scaling pedagogical innovation. I want to leave you today with a few different ideas based on what we talked about in terms of collective maturation and sponsorship. There are a few sort of questions to follow up and where this can be especially helpful. So a couple of follow-up questions. What happens in times of stress when the stakes are high? And how can that technology leadership team that you've been cultivating really help you when the stakes are high? And what role do they play when things happen, like a pandemic? So another question to think about, where is the initiative stuck? And what conversations do you need to help move you forward? That's why Kantor's model is so important, because if you feel like you're stuck, having those different voices on a team will really help you become unstuck, for lack of a better word. And then lastly, what elements of the initiative are gaining traction? Those are the initiatives that you really want to pay attention to, because you might be able to amplify those and easily bring more people on board. Remember, the end goal of the spiral model for change is to move from that core group that you initially started with to the entire population of your learning community. So this becomes a part of what you do, not just something that you talk about. So the last question in the guide for today is, what steps have you taken to support inquiry? I've shared some of the things that, that I've done historically when I've used this model to plan some new initiatives, but spend a little time to reflect on the steps that you've taken to support inquiry with your learning teams. And I ended with this slide the last time as well, because disruptive innovation rarely happens by chance. It is not a light bulb moment. You need to lay a foundation. You need to plot a strategic journey. And then the next step is what we talked about today, with seeding the ground for inquiry. Next week, March 16th, we'll be talking about some strategies you can use to reflect on progress and steps you can take as your system matures, and how you can continue to support those that are doing the innovative work. But really what you can do to kind of pause, see what's happening, and reflect on the progress you've seen to date. And by pausing, it'll kind of help you identify what are the important next steps that you need to take. That kind of wraps up things for today. If you have questions, please add them to the chat. I'd be happy to respond to them here or get back to you with answers. It was a pleasure sharing this model with you and being a part of your day.